Hello again. Several years ago I made a tutorial that showed how I make square sticks using a table saw in this jig that you see here. The tutorial before was only a PDF copy, and this one says March 2007, so it's been a while since this has been out. But I thought today it might be helpful to shoot a video tutorial on how to use this jig. The PDF tutorial shows a lot more on how to make the jig. So if you'd like to see these instructions, just send me a personal email on YouTube and I'll be happy to send this along. It might require that you establish an account on YouTube to send me a personal message, but that shouldn't be too much trouble. What I use square sticks for are making polyhedral puzzles, this being a cube, and you can see how tight the joints between the square pieces fit here. I'll bring it up close. But there are really no gaps, and to do that you really need very, very square sticks and evenly dimensioned sticks. And so there are several ways you can create a square stick. The one that springs to mind to most woodworkers is to use a joiner to make one square corner on a stick. So you would probably join both faces here. You'd preserve this corner and then plane the other two faces to be parallel with the opposite faces that you made square, and thereby you would have a square stick at the end. And a planer is a good tool to make this very properly dimensioned in a very controlled manner, down to thousandths of an inch even. However, I had some trouble with this. I used that exact method when I first began, but I had some trouble with the joiner creating a square edge all the way along the length of a stick. And this is only probably 8 inches long here, or 6 inches. So this is pretty short. On a joiner you'd like to use a much longer stick than 6 or 8 inches. It'd be hard to control this. And so that problem gets even worse, is how to create a square edge or two adjacent corners, two adjacent sides that are square to each other for a longer length. That was difficult to control. And then the planer will also chew up figured woods as you send it through. So what I like to use for the puzzles are some bird's eye maple. Here you can see some of the bird's eye figure here. That would a planer would do a bad job on figured woods, especially with some of the exotics that I use as well. And so I wasn't getting a very good surface finish from the planer either. So given the difficulties I had with controlling the squareness and also with the surface finish with the planer, I decided to develop a method using a table saw. And this isn't completely my idea. There are some help on the internet back then that I used. So eventually I got to this method with the table saw. It's not the fastest method. The joiner and planer method is going to be faster and probably less labor intensive, but the results aren't quite the same. And if you're going for real fine-tuning and perfection on the sticks like what I do here, you might want to be able to control that a little bit better. So, as I mentioned, I'm not going to explain exactly how to make this jig today, but I will show you one of the improvements that I've made since I made the tutorial. And again, if you want the tutorial, just send me a personal message. I'll be happy to send that along. One of the improvements that I've recently made are these little screw blocks. So this is a block with a threaded insert in it, and this is a socket head cap screw. And on the far side you can see a washer and a nut there. There is a little bit of play between the threads of a screw and the threaded insert in here. So I'd like to tighten that back out, take that play out, and secure the screw with the nut there. That way I can maintain positional control with the end of the position of the end of that screw. And that bears right up against the back end of this fence that I use here. The fence is the piece with all the clamps mounted to it. So what I do is I use a little short block on each end when I'm setting this jig up, which would be set right in here like this. One toward the front and another toward the back, close to these screw blocks. I clamp them down in place and cut the square stick similar to the way I'll show in a moment, and then I measure these. So to make fine adjustments, I don't actually move the screw because it's not calibrated for a rotation of the screw compared to how much it advances, and it's difficult to turn it such a small amount to make very fine changes, like within a couple of thousandths of an inch or 1/1000th of an inch even. So what I do is I slip a feeler gauge from a standard automotive set, slip that down between the fence and the end of the screw, and then if it needs to move out, I put a bigger shim in here. If it needs to move back, then I just put a smaller feeler gauge in there, and that's a way that I can control more carefully the offset between the end of the screw. You never actually have to move the screw. Okay, so from here I'll show how I use the jig, and this is a stick that I've cut off the bandsaw. It's about 7/8 of an inch square and very rough on all sides. I cut about 7/8 because the dimension that I shoot for in the final stick is 0.725. I used to use 0.750, but I found that some of the wood that I buy is not much thicker than 3/4 of an inch, and so 750 was too close to the wood dimension that I buy, and so I downsized by 25 thousandths to 725, and so that's just the measurement that I tend to use. I have the faces numbered here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's the order that I'll cut the faces. So to begin, I put face 1 toward the blade and clamp it down in only one position. The reason I clamp it down in only one position is because this side so far is not yet flat or straight, and so if I clamp it down in more than one location, I could twist or bend that stick in such a way that it will spring back after I take the clamps off, and that will change side 1. It may in some small amount, but again, I'm shooting for thousandths of an inch tolerances here. So I clamp it down in one spot for face 1. You can see face 1 is oriented toward the blade, and that will cut the stick off. And with cut 1, we're going to establish a flat and a straight side on face 1. So it'll be a bit loud as I run the saw, but then I'll turn that off and explain the second step. Okay, so now I have face 1 both flat and straight from the first cut. And one thing to note here, I noted earlier that the planer used to chew up figured woods, and it was difficult to read the direction of grain on some of these figured woods. The table saw method is much less sensitive to grain direction, but it will help on surface finish to read the grain, similar to the way you would do with a planer. You want to cut down the grain, not up the grain, or else you get a fuzzy surface finish on some of the woods. But like I said, this is far less sensitive to the grain direction as compared to a planer. The other thing to note is you might like to blow off the dust here as often as you think might need be necessary. I keep a flexible hose with a blowgun on it just hung from above, which helps things go along a little quicker. Okay, after the first face is cut, what I want to do is I'm going to rotate that downward, and that's going to be on the flat bed of the sled here. And this time I will clamp it down with 2 clamps. One thing to note here is that this stick will actually change dimension between 7/8 and 7/25, which is actually a fair bit of reduction, over 1/8 of an inch. And the adjustment of these clamps will be different for the beginning of the cuts as compared to the final. So that's why I like to have a 3rd clamp in the middle, which I adjust a little bit back so that it's ready to accommodate a bigger stick than what the final dimensions are going to be here. You may have seen me push pretty hard to get these clamps down. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and make cut 2. What we're going to establish with cut 2 is a square face and another flat and straight side. So we're going to have a square relationship between face 1 and face 2 because of the construction of the jig here and the way that we've rotated this stick. So it'll be square between the two faces all the way down, and we'll establish face 2 as straight as well. I can use 2 clamps here because we made face 1 flat and straight already, and we're not going to bend or twist the stick anymore if we clamp down tight. With face 2 now cut flat and straight and square to face 1, now we're going to insert a shim between the fence and the stick for the last 2 cuts. Let me say cuts on faces 3 and 4. And we're going to rotate the stick in a clockwise fashion once again. This shim that I use is a piece of 1/16 inch thick aluminum, about 3/4 of an inch wide. I bought this at a home store. And you want to check to make sure that the thickness is consistent all the way along. Try not to bend it. It is flexible enough you can bend it back, but if it's locally bended real sharp, you won't be able to push that back with the stick. So I try to keep these pretty straight and not bend them. So as I said before, I'm going to rotate this stick clockwise so that face 2 is now down on the bed of the sled, and I'm going to insert this 1/16 inch shim and clamp it back down in 2 locations, both front and back. You want to hold this up nice and tight against the fence because this is the final dimensioning for the sides between face 1 and face 3. So now we're going to be exactly 0.725 inches between face 1 and face 3 when I'm done with this 3rd cut. This 1/16 inch shim needs to be in place when you set the location of the fence. Now for the final cut on face 4, I'm going to rotate the stick clockwise once more time, press it up against the fence, and put the toggle clamps back down. Again, the shim is in place for face 4. So now you can see the quality of the surface finish. I don't know if that shows up in the camera very well, but that's a very smooth surface on all sides. There's a little bit of a fuzzy edge right there on that on that edge, but that's acceptable. That will be easy to take that off with just a little bit of sandpaper and very little effort. One thing that will help on the surface finish is to use blade stiffeners. These are the 5-inch blade stiffeners on both sides of the blade, and you need to have the blade stiffener on this side, on the arbor side, in place before you cut this jig off. And the tutorial explains that as well. Those blade stiffeners take a lot of the run out of the blade, and you get a much smoother finish with the blade stiffeners in place. You can actually feel it on the smoothness of the stick. So now, for the final test, use a dial calipers to test the dimensions of the stick here. And as you can see, that's exactly 725. Flip it, 725 again. Also want to check for squareness of the stick. So I'm going to point the camera up toward the light. And what I use is a engineer's square, kind of like this, and check the corners for square. If you hold this up to the light, you shouldn't be able to see any light between the square and the stick, and that face looks pretty good. I don't know that the camera will really show up if it didn't work out quite right, but as you can see, it's pretty square. It's very square actually. Looking at it by eye, I can tell that there's no light coming through there on any of the faces. So that's the method I use. Again, it's fairly labor intensive to make square sticks like this, but it rolls along pretty quickly. And I'll show you one more time how to make the stick without all the explanation in between, just so you can get a sense for how long this might take for each stick. once again we have a good surface finish on all 4 faces. A little burr on the edges, but a little sandpaper will take that off. So I hope this was helpful. If you'd like the tutorial, again, just send me a personal message. I'll be happy to send that along. Thanks for watching.